The Telvin Combat Academy had stood for 1,217 standard cycles at the edge of the Proxima Tertius system, a monument to martial excellence that made even the most war-hardened species pause with something approaching reverence. Its obsidian towers rose from a moon that had been terraformed specifically to house the institution, each spire inscribed with the names of legendary warriors who had walked its halls. The academy didn't just produce soldiers. It produced artists of violence, philosophers of combat, individuals who understood that the difference between brutality and mastery was the space between heartbeats. What made the academy truly special, however, wasn't its history or its architecture, or even its impressive roster of alumni who had gone on to command fleets and topple governments. No. What made Telvin unique in the known galaxy was its perfect record of assessment. In over a millennium of operation, training warriors from 263 different species, the Academy had never, not once, miscalculated a student's capability. Their scanning technology, developed by the Quix Collective and refined over centuries, could measure threat potential down to the molecular level. It analyzed bone density, neural response time, muscular efficiency, cardiovascular capacity, and approximately 4,000 other variables that determined whether someone would be a mediocre fighter or a legendary one. The scanner had predicted every champion, identified every washout, and most importantly, prevented every catastrophic mismatch that could have resulted in unnecessary death. The system was foolproof, elegant, and had achieved something rare in a galaxy full of chaos. Perfect reliability. The instructors trusted it absolutely. They had to. When you're training beings who could accidentally kill each other with a misplaced strike, you need certainty. Head instructor Vexathor of the Epsilon Empire had built his entire teaching philosophy around that certainty. A towering figure even by his species' considerable standards, Vexathor stood nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton the deep blue of his homeworld's oceans, hardened by 200 cycles of combat. His forearms moved with a precision that seemed to mock physics, each one capable of independent complex action. He had trained under the previous head instructor, who had trained under her predecessor, in an unbroken line that stretched back to the Academy's founding. In all his years, across all his students, Vexathor had never been bested in the training arena. Not once. It wasn't arrogance to acknowledge this, just fact. Which made the current situation somewhat awkward. The human had arrived 3 standard weeks ago, part of the new Terran exchange program that had been established after humanity had finally convinced the galactic community that they were, despite appearances, actually a spacefaring civilization and not just remarkably clever primates who had stumbled onto faster-than-light travel through sheer bloody-minded persistence. The community had been skeptical. Humanity had been insistent. Compromises had been made, including sending a handful of humans to various prestigious institutions to prove they could operate in civilized galactic society. Kira Okonkwo had been Earth's selection for the Combat Academy, and her arrival had caused quite a stir. Not because she was impressive. The opposite, actually. She looked soft by every metric the instructors understood. No natural armor plating, no redundant organs visible through bioscans, no claws or venomous glands or electromagnetic sensing organs. Just skin. Distressingly vulnerable skin stretched over a frame that seemed designed more for aesthetic purposes than survival. She stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, which was small by Academy standards, with dark skin and darker eyes, and hair that she kept tied back in intricate patterns that had confused the xenobiology staff. The whispers had started immediately. Humans were from a death world. Not just any death world, but Earth. A planet that had scored so catastrophically high on the hazard index that 3 separate review boards had been convened to check if the assessment software had contracted a virus. The planet rotated at a speed that should cause vertigo. Its gravity was punishing. It had weather systems that could level cities, tectonic activity that reshaped continents, and an atmosphere with enough free oxygen to make most species euphoric or dead, usually in that order. The native life had evolved in an arms race so vicious that humans had developed persistence hunting as a survival strategy, which meant they would literally just follow prey until it died of exhaustion. But looking at Kira, casually chatting with other students in the dining hall, laughing at jokes in 3 different languages she'd picked up in less than a week. It was hard to reconcile the terrifying reputation with the reality. She seemed nice, almost aggressively friendly, actually, which had unnerved several of the more predator-inclined species who recognized the behavior as a dominance display. Apex predators could afford to be friendly. They had nothing to prove. The Academy operated on a simple principle: assess, train, evaluate, graduate. Every student underwent the same process. 3 days after arrival, each recruit entered the scanning chamber for a comprehensive analysis that would determine their training track, their sparring partners, and their probability of survival in actual combat. The scanner didn't lie. It couldn't. It was measuring objective physical reality. When Kira's turn came, half the faculty had found excuses to be present. Curiosity about humanity had reached fever pitch. The Telvin scanner occupied an entire wing of the Academy's medical facility. A cylindrical chamber 15 meters in diameter filled with enough sensing equipment to perform real-time molecular analysis of every cell in a subject's body. Students stood in the center while arrays of instruments measured everything from bone density to the speed of their fastest neural pathways. Kira had walked in wearing the standard Academy bodysuit, a form-fitting garment designed to not interfere with scanning. She'd waved at the observation window where faculty and students crowded, then stepped onto the platform with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she'd done this 100 times before, even though the technology was completely foreign to her species. The scan began normally enough. Light washed over her from multiple angles, instruments hummed, data began flowing across displays in the observation room. The xenobiology professor, a Thrin named Kelisk, who had personally cataloged 237 species, watched the readouts with growing confusion. Human bone structure was dense, unusually so. Muscle fiber composition showed extraordinary efficiency. The cardiovascular system had redundancies that didn't make immediate evolutionary sense. Neural pathway speeds were impossibly faster than species with dedicated evolved enhancements. Then the scanner reached its combat assessment protocols, and things got weird. The threat level analyzer, the crown jewel of the Telvan system, began its calculation. This was the moment of truth for every warrior, the objective measurement of how dangerous they were. The scale ran from 1 to 10,000, with most species averaging somewhere in the 500 range. Elite warriors, the ones who became legends, typically scored in the 2 to 3,000 range. The highest recorded score in Academy history was 4,700, achieved by a Vraxian whose species had evolved for gladiatorial combat. The number next to Kira's scan began climbing. 500, 1,000, 2,000. The murmurs in the observation room started. 3,000, 4,000. Kelisk leaned forward, mandibles clicking in confusion. 5,000, 6,000. The display flickered. The number disappeared. In its place, text appeared in the flat, emotionless typeface of automated systems delivering very bad news. Threat level. Undefined biological parameters exceed assessment. Matrix recommendation. Do not engage. Classification. Extreme hazard. The observation room went silent. Kellisk checked the equipment. Everything was functioning normally. The scanner wasn't broken. It had simply encountered something it couldn't quantify within its existing parameters. In over 1,000 years of operation, this had never happened. Ever. Vexathor stared at the display, all 4 of his eyes focused on those 3 words. Do not engage. The scanner was recommending that trained warriors, elite fighters from species that had evolved for combat, should not engage this soft-looking human in any form of physical confrontation. It was absurd. It had to be a glitch. In the scanning chamber, Kira noticed the delay. She looked up at the observation window and shrugged, a gesture that translated across species as uncertainty. The lights had stopped moving. Was something wrong? The Academy's protocol was clear. Every student, regardless of scanning results, underwent a practical combat assessment. Theory was useful, but the arena told the truth. Vexathor made his decision immediately. A malfunctioning scan didn't change centuries of procedure. The human would be assessed like every other student. Besides, he'd been teaching for 200 cycles. He'd trained warriors from species that could breathe fire, phase through solid matter, and generate localized gravity wells. One small human, regardless of what a confused scanner claimed, wasn't going to be an issue. The combat assessment arena occupied the heart of the Academy, a circular space 50 meters in diameter with a floor designed to adapt to different gravitational preferences. The walls were reinforced carbo steel, capable of withstanding artillery strikes, because sometimes training got enthusiastic. Observation platforms rose in tiers around the arena, providing clear views for the students who weren't currently trying not to die. For Kira's assessment, every available space was filled. Word had spread about the scanner malfunction, and curiosity had overwhelmed caution. Students from 43 different species crowded the platforms, chattering in a dozen languages, making wagers on how long the human would last. The betting heavily favored less than 30 seconds. Humans were deathworlders, sure, but they looked so fragile. Those thin limbs, that exposed skin, the complete lack of natural weapons. How dangerous could they really be? The medical team had positioned themselves closer than usual, expecting to need to respond quickly. Human physiology was new to them, and while they'd received comprehensive briefings, there was a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. They were prepared for broken bones, lacerations, maybe some level of concussive trauma. Humans could apparently recover from impressive amounts of damage, but that didn't mean they should have to. Vexathor entered the arena carrying his training blade, a weapon he'd used for decades. It wasn't his combat blade. That weapon had been retired after he'd achieved the rank of Instructor, sealed away in the Academy vault with the other legendary arms. The training blade was still a serious piece of equipment, though. 1 meter of molecularly aligned alloy that could, in the right hands, cut through most known materials. It was powered down for training, naturally. The plasma edge was inactive, but the weight, the balance, the feel of it was identical to a real combat weapon. He'd used this blade to train thousands of students. He knew every way it could move, every strike it could make, every defense it could provide. It was an extension of his body, as familiar as his own limbs. Kira stood on the opposite, on the side of the arena, and Vexathor had to admit she didn't look nervous. She'd changed into training gear, practical clothing that allowed movement without being restrictive. Her hands were empty. No weapon, no armor, just flesh and bone and whatever impossible biology the scanner claimed it couldn't measure. The arena protocols were simple. The instructor would attack with gradually increasing intensity until the student either demonstrated competence or yielded. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding where someone actually stood, what they could handle, how they responded under pressure. Vexathor had conducted this assessment thousands of times. He knew exactly how much force to use, how to push without breaking, how to teach without traumatizing. He raised his blade in the traditional salute, a gesture of respect that predated the academy itself. Kira mirrored the gesture without a weapon, which was either brave or stupid. Probably stupid. The observation platforms grew quiet. Even the most boisterous students recognized the moment before combat, that crystalline instant where everything became simple and clear. Vexathor moved. 2 centuries of training translated into an attack so fast it was nearly invisible. A testing strike, quick and controlled, aimed to disarm or force a defensive response. The blade cut through air with a whisper of displaced atmosphere. A strike that would tap Kira's shoulder and end the assessment in the traditional manner. First, contact to the instructor. A respectable showing for a new student who had the wisdom to not resist overwhelming skill. Kira's hand moved faster. It shouldn't have been possible. Vexathor had studied human physiology in preparation for this assessment. He knew their neural response times, understood their muscle fiber recruitment patterns, had reviewed the biological limitations that should govern their movement speed. What Kira did violated all of it. Her hand shot out and caught the blade mid-swing, not deflected it, not dodged it, caught it. Her fingers wrapped around the molecularly aligned alloy as if she was picking up a dropped utensil, and the blade stopped moving. The arena went absolutely silent. Vexathor stood frozen, all 4 of his eyes focused on the impossible sight in front of him. His training blade, the weapon he'd wielded for 200 cycles, was being held by a hand. A human hand that shouldn't have the reaction time to intercept the strike, shouldn't have the strength to stop its momentum, and definitely shouldn't be able to grip a blade designed to cut through reinforced combat armor without losing several fingers. Kira looked at the blade in her hand, then up at Vexathor, and her expression suggested she was just as surprised as he was. "Sorry," she said in Galactic Standard, her accent marking her as someone still learning the language. "Instinct. Should I let go?" In the observation platforms, chaos erupted. Students were standing, pointing, shouting in multiple languages. The medical team was checking their instruments, convinced they'd somehow missed seeing Kira get injured. The xenobiology professor was frantically pulling up human biological data, trying to reconcile what she'd just witnessed with what should be possible. Vexathor's training reasserted itself. Something unexpected had happened. Adapt, assess, overcome. That was the way of combat. He pulled his blade back, and Kira released it without resistance. He examined the weapon quickly. No damage. He examined Kira's hand. Also no damage, which was somehow more disturbing. His blade wasn't sharp enough to cut in training mode, but catching it should have resulted in some level of impact trauma. Her palm looked completely fine. "Again," Vexathor said, because he was nothing if not thorough. This time he didn't hold back quite so much. The strike came from a different angle, faster, with more force behind it. Not enough to injure seriously, but enough to overwhelm a defensive response and land a solid contact. The blade moved in a path that had disarmed countless students over the years. Kira's other hand intercepted it just as easily. The strike that should have been impossible to read, too fast to counter, stopped against her palm with barely any apparent effort. This time she held on, and when Vexathor tried to pull the blade free, it didn't move. The human was stronger than him, not just a little stronger, significantly stronger. She was using one hand to neutralize a weapon held by someone with 4 arms and 200 cycles of training. "This is fascinating," Kira said conversationally, still holding his blade. "The balance on this is incredible. Is this traditional Krillian forging, or more modern alloy composition?" Vexthor stared at her. The human had just casually stopped 2 strikes that would have ended any normal assessment. And she wanted to discuss metallurgy. In the observation platforms, students had stopped making noise. They were watching with the kind of intense focus that prey animals developed. The recognition that they were witnessing something potentially very dangerous. He shifted his grip and attacked with all 4 arms simultaneously. A combination strike that utilized his full capability. It was more force than he'd ever used on a student in an assessment. The kind of attack that should require a team response to properly defend against. Kira moved. Human beings, it turns out, didn't move like other species. Most species telegraphed their intentions with micro-movements, preparatory muscle tensions that trained observers could read. Humans, evolved from pursuit predators, had learned to move without warning. Kira went from stationary to in motion without any visible transition, her body shifting with a fluidity that seemed to mock the concept of inertia. She ducked under 2 of Vexthor's strikes, caught the 3rd with her hand again, and redirected the 4th past her body with minimal effort. Then, while he was still processing how she'd defended against an attack designed to overwhelm defense, she stepped inside his guard and simply stood there, well within the range where his blade couldn't effectively strike. "You're very good," she said, looking up at him with apparent genuine admiration. "I can see why you're the head instructor. That combination attack was beautiful." Vexthor experienced something he hadn't felt in a training arena for nearly a century. Uncertainty. He was the one with 200 cycles of experience, 4 arms, natural armor plating, and a weapon designed by one of the finest forge masters in the Krillian Empire. She was a human barely 3 weeks off her planet with no weapon, no armor, and apparently no concern about the fact that she'd just casually neutralized his attack. He stepped back, reassessing. The human followed, maintaining that uncomfortably close distance. Her eyes tracked his movements with an intensity that triggered old predator recognition instincts. He struck again, faster this time, abandoning the teaching approach and moving more toward actual combat intensity. The blade came in high, then low, then from the side, a flowing combination designed to provide no openings. Kira defended against all of it. Not perfectly. Her technique was clearly self-taught, or at least unconventional. But effectively. She moved like water, like she was reading his intentions before he fully formed them. Every strike that should have landed was redirected or avoided or, most frustratingly, caught and held. In the observation platforms, a Vraxian combat specialist was providing running commentary to the students around him. "She's using his momentum against him. Look at that. She's not blocking, she's redirecting. That's advanced technique, usually requires decades of training to do instinctively." "But she has no formal training," a smaller student protested. "Humans just joined the community. They don't have combat academies." "They have something," the Vraxian replied, watching Kira deflect another combination with minimal movement. "Something that taught them to fight things bigger and stronger than themselves. That's survivor technique. She's fighting like prey that learned to bite back." Vexthor increased the intensity again. This was well beyond assessment level now. He was fighting the way he would against a peer, against someone whose capability was unknown but clearly substantial. His blade moved in patterns that had won him tournaments, earned him his position, defined his reputation. And Kira adapted. That was the thing about humans that the scanner had tried to warn everyone about. They adapted. Their bodies adapted. Their minds adapted. Their tactics adapted. Every species had some level of adaptability, but humans had evolved on a planet where adaptation was the difference between survival and extinction. Their neural plasticity was exceptional, their pattern recognition bordered on prescient, and their ability to learn in real time during high-stress situations was something other species required extensive training to develop. Kira was learning his style as they fought. He could see it happening. Her defenses became more efficient. Her counters became more precise. She stopped reacting to feints. When he tried a deceptive combination, she ignored the setup and neutralized the real threat. And then she started attacking back. Nothing fancy. Simple strikes with her empty hands, testing his defense. But they came fast and from unexpected angles, and Vexathor found himself defending for the first time in longer than he cared to remember. A hand streaked toward his center mass. He blocked with one arm. Another hand came from the opposite side. He blocked with another arm. A foot swept low, targeting his balance. He adjusted his stance. And while he was managing those attacks, Kira's hand darted in and tapped his chest, right over where his primary heart was located. First contact to the student. The arena fell silent again, but this time it was a different quality of silence. Not shock, recognition, understanding. The human had landed first contact. In an assessment against the head instructor of the most prestigious combat academy in known space, the soft-looking deathworlder from Earth had scored a point. Vexathor looked down at where Kira's hand had tapped his chest. It had been a gentle touch, carefully controlled, but he'd felt the strength behind it. If she'd wanted to, that tap could have been a strike, possibly a devastating one. "Did I do something wrong?" Kira asked, and she genuinely sounded concerned. "The rules weren't entirely clear. I thought this was sparring, but if it's something else..." Vexathor realized several things simultaneously. First, the scanner had been right. Do not engage. It had measured something in human physiology that couldn't be properly quantified, some combination of factors that made them absurdly dangerous, despite their lack of obvious weapons. Second, Kira wasn't actually trying to win this assessment. She was trying not to hurt him. Every movement, every defense, every careful tap had been controlled to not cause injury. She'd been treating him the way he'd been planning to treat her, as someone fragile who needed to be handled carefully. Third, and most importantly, he was in over his head in the most literal sense possible. "Continue," he said, because giving up wasn't in his nature. They fought for another 7 minutes. It felt like hours. Vexathor employed every technique he knew, every trick he'd learned across 200 cycles of combat. Kira countered or avoided or simply outlasted all of it. Her breathing never became labored. Her movement never slowed. If anything, she was getting faster, adjusting to the arena's gravity with a precision that spoke to remarkable proprioception. The breakthrough came when he attempted a high-risk technique, a spinning strike with all 4 arms that sacrificed defense for overwhelming offense. It was the kind of move you used when you needed to end a fight immediately or not at all. The blade came around with enough force to dent carbo steel. Kira didn't catch it this time. She ducked under the strike, stepped into his rotation, and used his own momentum against him. Her hand found his wrist, applied pressure in exactly the right place, and suddenly Vexathor's grip on his training blade wasn't as secure as it should be. A twist, a pull, a shift of weight that utilized his mass against him, and the blade clattered across the arena floor. He was disarmed. The head instructor of the Telvan Combat Academy, undefeated in assessment combat for 200 cycles, had been disarmed by a human with no formal training who'd been in the facility for 3 weeks. Vexathor found himself on his back, all 4 arms spread out, looking up at Kira's concerned face. She offered him a hand to help him up. Of course she did. Humans, according to the briefings, were obsessive about social bonding behaviors. They helped each other. Even after completely dominating an opponent in combat, they offered assistance with apparent sincerity. He took her hand and allowed her to help him stand. The observation platforms remained silent. No one seemed to know what to say. This had never happened before. Not in assessment, not in training, never. "Are you okay?" Kira asked. "I tried to be gentle with the takedown, but human and Krillian physiology don't map perfectly, and I was worried about your joints. Did I injure anything?" Vexathor checked himself. His pride was devastated. His reputation was in shambles. His understanding of combat hierarchy had been fundamentally revised. But physically, he was fine. She had been gentle, careful, concerned about his well-being while systematically dismantling 2 centuries of expertise. "I'm uninjured," he managed to say. That was instructive. "Your technique is really beautiful," Kira said, and she actually meant it. "The way you coordinate 4-armed combat is amazing. On Earth we only have 2 arms, so I've never seen anything like that. Could you teach me? I'd love to learn proper form." The head of xenobiology, Kellisk, was frantically taking notes. The medical team was reviewing the entire fight, trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Students were beginning to talk again, their voices a mixture of excitement, confusion, and in some cases, existential dread. Vexathor retrieved his training blade from where it had fallen. He examined it carefully. No damage, same as before. He looked at Kira, who was examining her hands with apparent interest. The palms were slightly red from repeatedly catching a blade, but otherwise undamaged. Human skin could apparently withstand impacts that should have caused significant trauma. Another gift from their deathworld evolution. "I need to consult with the faculty," Vexathor said finally. "This assessment has raised questions." "Did I pass?" Kira asked hopefully. "I'd really like to stay. This place is incredible." "Pass." The human wanted to know if she'd passed. She'd just done something unprecedented in the Academy's history, and she was concerned about meeting minimum standards. "You passed," Vexathor said. And several of his colleagues in the observation platforms made noises of agreement that sounded slightly hysterical. The faculty meeting that followed the assessment lasted for 6 hours and resolved exactly nothing. The scanner's results had been correct. Humans were, in fact, extremely dangerous. But the assessment had also revealed something the scanner couldn't measure. Kira didn't want to hurt anyone. She'd defeated an elite instructor while actively trying to minimize any chance of injury. That spoke to control, discipline, and an understanding of force application that usually took decades to develop. The Academy's administration decided to proceed cautiously. Kira would be allowed to continue her training, but her sparring partners would be selected very carefully. Volunteers only. Species with sufficient durability to handle an accidental impact from someone who could apparently bench press small vehicles if the strength calculations were correct. Word spread quickly through the Academy. The human who had disarmed Vexathor became an instant legend. Students approached her constantly, asking questions about Earth, about human combat styles, about how she'd learned to fight. Kira answered everything with friendly enthusiasm. explaining that she'd grown up helping her father in his forge, which had taught her about weight distribution and leverage. She'd done athletics, which helped with reflexes. She'd studied historical human martial arts because they were interesting. Nothing special. Just normal human things. Which was exactly the problem. These were normal human things. If an average human from a forge-working family could do this, what could human specialists achieve? What about their military? Their actual warriors, the ones who trained for combat as a profession? The galaxy was still trying to process the implications when, 3 days after the assessment, Kira approached Vex Thor in the training halls. He'd been practicing alone, working through techniques with a precision born of frustration. 200 cycles of expertise, and he'd been defeated by someone who'd learned combat as a hobby. "Instructor?" Kira said politely. "Could I ask you something?" He turned to face her, noting that she maintained a respectful distance. She'd learned quickly that some species found close proximity stressful, especially from someone they now recognized as potentially dangerous. "Of course," he said. "When we were fighting, there was a moment where you went for a spinning attack with all 4 arms. That was gorgeous. And I think I understand the theory. But I can't figure out the weight distribution. Would you be willing to show me slowly? I'd like to learn." Vex Thor stared at her. The move that had left him vulnerable, the technique that had ultimately led to his defeat, and she wanted him to teach her how to do it properly. Not to mock him, because she genuinely wanted to learn, because despite being able to defeat him, she recognized that he had centuries of expertise that she lacked. He showed her the technique. They spent 2 hours in the training hall, instructor and student, working through the mechanics of 4-armed combat adapted for a 2-armed human. Other students gathered to watch, and eventually, it turned into an impromptu class. Kira learned. Vex Thor taught. The galaxy's rigid hierarchies bent slightly to accommodate something new. 6 months later, the Telvan Combat Academy updated its scanning protocols. The new system included specific parameters for deathworld species, with particular attention to humans. The threat assessment had been recalibrated. Where Kira's scan had returned undefined, the new system was more precise. Threat level: extreme, approach with caution. Recommendation: engage only with consent. Classification: cooperative apex predator. Note: species demonstrates exceptional control and social bonding. Dangerous if threatened, protective if trusted. Kira had become one of the Academy's most popular students, not despite her capability, but because of it. She helped other students with their training, offering perspectives from human combat philosophy. She was patient, enthusiastic, and genuinely excited to learn from every species she encountered. Her final assessment scores were the highest in Academy history. But everyone who'd trained with her remembered something else. Her careful control, her constant concern for her sparring partners, her genuine joy in learning. Vex Thor eventually recovered his reputation, though it took a different form. He became known as the instructor who'd survived assessing the first human at the Academy, who'd had the courage to engage even when the scanner had warned against it, and who'd adapted his teaching to accommodate a species that broke all previous models of combat capability. The betting pools had, notably, stopped taking wagers on human combat assessments. Betting requires uncertainty, and one thing had become absolutely certain. When the scanner said, "Do not engage," it wasn't making a suggestion. It was providing a friendly warning that you were about to encounter something evolution had spent millions of years optimizing for survival on a planet that actively tried to kill everything living on it. And the thing about survivors was simple. They were very, very good at surviving. Even when you thought you had the advantage, even when you had 4 arms and 200 cycles of training and a blade forged by masters. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was underestimate someone who learned to catch blades barehanded just to help their father in his forge. The scanner had warned them. They'd engaged anyway, and in doing so, they'd learned something valuable about humanity. The most dangerous species in the galaxy was also one of the kindest. As long as you didn't mistake kindness for weakness. Because the moment you did, you'd find yourself on your back in a training arena, looking up at a concerned human face, asking if you were okay, while your pride and your combat record bled out across the floor. The Academy added a new inscription to its walls that cycle, carved in 70 languages, including Earth's English. True mastery is knowing when to strike, when to defend, and when to extend a hand in friendship. The greatest warriors understand all three. Kira had taught them that, not through a speech or a demonstration, but by being exactly what humanity was: terrifying and gentle, dangerous and kind, willing to fight and desperate to connect. The galaxy was still figuring out what to do with a species like that. But at least now the scanners were properly calibrated.